Good morning, students. Today we'll be talking about measurement and motion. Under the course outline, we have measurement, speed, velocity and acceleration, graphs of equation, falling bodies and density. Now we start with measurements. Can you imagine what the world would be like without the knowledge of measurements? How would our communications be understood? Here is a conversation between two friends that throws more light on importance of measurements. You have Mr. A saying to his friend, I have just 3 to spend here. I still have 50 to cover to get home. His friend Mr. B was amazed and he asked, 3 what and 50 what? Mr. A smiled and said, I was just joking around, friend. I mean 3 minutes and 50 kilometers. Oh, exclaimed Mr. B. Now I understand. I've got to release you now. We can see from that conversation that Mr. A was not clear enough with his measurements. That's why Mr. B couldn't get what his friend was saying. From the next slide, we'll talk more about the composition of a good measurement. Measurement is in 2 parts. We have the magnitude, which means size or how large a thing is. The second part of measurement is the unit. The unit enables us to know the quantity that is being talked about or the physical quantity involved. An example is saying 100 meter. The 100 there is the part that talks about the magnitude, how big that thing is. While the meter enables you to know that this is the physical quantity that is talked about. And when you hear meter, it's majorly your length or your distance. So back to the former conversation between the two friends. His measurements had magnitude, but the units were missing, which made the conversation vague. Let's proceed to the next slide. This slide contains some common physical quantities and their basic units. So here you get to know the basic unit of the common quantities that we have. The first one is the length. The basic unit for length is meter. Next is time. The basic unit for time is second. Next is mass. The basic unit for mass is kilogram. Next is temperature. The basic unit for temperature is Kelvin. Next is electric current. The basic unit for electric current is ampere. Next is amount of substance. The basic unit for amount of substance is mole. There are some situations whereby we use the multiple forms of these basic units. For example, when you have very large quantities, or like in terms of meter, you have a very long quantity. You might not use it as meter. You might have to use it as kilometer. That is the tripled form of your meter. Let's proceed to the next slide. This slide shows us the instruments used for measurement. The images there represent that of a tape rule, a measuring tape, a ruler. This image represents measuring tools for length. We can have other measuring tools. For example, we have the clock. The clock is used to measure time. Stopwatch is also used to measure time. Hourglass is also used to measure time. We have a ruler for length. Weighing scale is used to measure mass. The ammeter is used to measure current. Thermometer is used to measure temperature. We have many measuring tools or instruments. Let's move to the next slide. On this slide, we talk about motion. Motion refers to the phenomenon in which an object changes position with respect to time. The opposite of motion is rest. When a body is not at rest, then it is in motion. Motion can simply be defined again as the act of changing position by a body. When a body doesn't remain in a particular state, it moves. That means the body is in motion. Motion can be mathematically described in terms of some physical quantities such as displacement, distance, velocity, acceleration, speed, and time. Let's get to know the types of motion we have. We have various types of motion, but the common ones are the rectilinear motion, which is defined as motion along a straight line. An example of this is having a straight line ruled down, then you following that straight line to get to wherever you want to get to. That means you are undergoing a rectilinear motion. The next type of motion we'll be talking about is the circular motion. Circular motion is defined as the motion along a circular path. When you have a circle and you're moving around the edges, you are said to be undergoing a circular motion. Next is the Brownian motion. This motion is also known as a random motion. It is a motion in an irregular manner, in an irregular pattern. There is no clearly defined way in which you are walking or moving. You're just moving anyhow. That is your Brownian motion. We proceed. The next type of motion is the periodic motion. This is a motion about a fixed point. It is also known as a to and fro motion. Example of this kind of movement can be seen in a pendulum bob or in the movement of a swing, whereby it goes right and left, to the right, to the left, to the right, to the left. You are still maintaining a fixed position, movement around a fixed position. Then we move on to rotational motion. Rotational motion is defined as the spinning movement of a body about its axis. This kind of motion can be seen in the rotation of the earth about its axis. It can also be seen in the rotation of the wheel around the axle. Let's move to some physical quantities that can be used to define motion. As we mentioned earlier, there are some physical quantities that are used to describe motion. The first one here is speed. Speed can be defined as the rate of change of distance, or you can say it is the distance traveled per unit time. Speed tells us how fast a body or an object is moving. The unit for measuring speed is kilometer per hour. We can also measure it, and we can also have a unit as meters per second. Next quantity is velocity. Velocity is very similar to speed, only that the velocity is a directional speed. That means for velocity, you know the direction you are heading to. The direction could be north, it could be south. You can have 3 meters per second towards the north direction, and so on. The next physical quantity we're going to be talking about is our acceleration. Acceleration is also a very important quantity to be discussed when you're talking about motion. Acceleration is defined as the rate of change of velocity. So it can also be said to be the change of velocity per unit time. A body is said to accelerate when its velocity changes and becomes increased. It is represented mathematically as change in velocity divided by the change in time. The unit for measuring acceleration is meters per second. So this is where we will be stopping today. We'll continue in the other class.